What do the American pound cake and Scottish shortbread have in common? The near equal quantities of flour, sugar, and butter. The Scottish shortbread has minimal ingredients, quick to make, and gets better with time. While the Scottish shortbread is a cookie, not a cake like the American pound cake, it is unlike most shortbread cookies. The Scottish version is rich and buttery. It has the unique addition of rice flour to provide a sandy texture. It has deep 12th century historical roots, once only made of oats and yeast like a bread, with sugar sprinkled on top. That is where the name shortbread originated. The Scottish shortbread has symbolic shapes. The circle with slices like pizza or pie are called petticoat tails and are thought to resemble 16th century's Mary Queen of Scots' full petticoat design. The rectangular shape is called shortbread fingers because they're in long slender shapes, and the round cookies are called shortbread rounds. The ingredients for my Scottish shortbread recipe are all-purpose flour, rice flour, granulated sugar, and butter. If using unsalted butter, you'll also want salt. This is a very simple 4-ingredient dessert that you can make easily with your kids. They would love the hands-on interactive part where you mix ingredients by hand. This recipe comes together super quick, so go ahead and preheat your oven to 325 degrees. And then you're going to go ahead and prepare a pan. You need a 9 by 13 inch dish pan and a sheet of parchment paper that overhangs the dish. And then for the parchment paper to stay in the pan without the cookies becoming crinkly, take some scissors. You're going to snip each corner of the parchment paper so the paper flattens out. So wherever that corner is, snip all the way down to where the paper meets the pan. And then the paper overlays so that the bottom will be and the sides will become flat. There, the paper fits nicely in the pan. I'll usually come back and just snip that inside corner piece because it's sticking out a bit. Notice how smoothly and flat that paper fits into the pan. Just set it aside for now. Add 3 sticks of softened butter to a large bowl. And because it is softened, you should be able to mix this using a spoon or a hand mixer. I find the hand mixer is fairly easy. Stir until the butter is smooth. Okay, our butter is nice and smooth enough. We're going to add 225 grams of sugar, and this is 1 cup. I'm using soft, superfine sugar. This is called baker's sugar or caster sugar. If you can't find this or you don't want to buy it, just take your granulated sugar and pulverize it in your food processor to get it fine enough that you have superfine sugar, but of course you don't want powdered sugar. This is not the same. This is granulated, it's just superfine granulated. And then we're just gonna slowly mix this sugar in with the butter. Now, I'm using a hand mixer here, but traditionally, the Scottish recipes are usually done by hand. So you would start with a spoon. That's up to you, but I don't know if the flavor matters much. And then of course the superfine sugar is important in this recipe because that shortbread is going to be really smooth in texture aside from some granulation from the rice flour. So we want that sugar to be smooth as well. Okay, you want to mix until your butter becomes fluffy, light, and pale in color. And we are there. In a separate bowl, we're going to add 360 grams of all-purpose flour, and that is 3 cups that have been fluffed, scooped into your measuring cup, and then leveled off the top to make sure we don't get any more than we need. And then to this, we're going to add 160 grams of rice flour, is 1 cup. So this rice flour is what's going to give the traditional grittiness, kind of sandiness to a Scottish shortbread cookie. So notice there's not a ton in here. There's not as much as all-purpose flour, but there is just enough to get that texture that we are looking for in that type of cookie. If you are using unsalted butter, at this point you would also add a half a teaspoon of salt. But I'm using salted butter here, so I don't need any salt in this recipe. It has just enough in it. So we're going to do a quick little stir to combine, as you see here. And then using a sifter, we want this cookie to be relatively light. Sift in this flour mixture and just put it in over top of the butter. Okay, if you have any particles remaining, just dump them out. Okay, at this point you can use a spoon, but I have found this dough is going to be tough it's much easier to choose my hands. And not only that, but I love the soft feel of that butter and cold flour just oozing through my fingers. It's actually fairly nice. So go with the hands. That's how you would do it in Scotland, at least traditionally. Okay, when all the flour has been mixed in with the butter, then you know you're in good shape. Now notice it looks crumbly here, but this is how you know when it's right. It's wet and sticky enough that it'll form a ball, and this is what it's going to do in the baking dish. I like the traditional Scottish shortbread finger shape, so to me it's super easy, and so I'm going to put mine in the dish instead of making the petticoat tails, which is what you could do by placing it in a pie pan, or you could do shortbread rounds by rolling the dough in a log and then cutting it out into circles. Nevertheless, for rectangles, you're going to put the dough in the baking dish like you see me doing here, all of it. And actually it is a dough. I know it doesn't really look like one right now. And then you're going to press it down with your fingers. And it's going to look like that ball of dough that we made when we pressed it together in our hands in the bowl so that you can see that it sticks together. So you could use your fingers, you could use your knuckles. I know that's sort of traditional in Scotland too, as bakers would use their knuckles. Since I want a smooth top to mine, I actually have a small roller here. I'm just going to use that and kind of compact it down a little bit more and smooth out the top. But you don't need a roller. Just use your hands, it'll be fine. So actually you could go ahead and put it in the oven right now. But what I would prefer to do is go ahead and score these into bars because it makes it easier to cut when they come out of the oven once they're scored. So I want to score them 7 rows across and 4 rows down, and that should give me about a 3 to 4 by 1 inch rectangle. Start at one end, and this you don't have to cut all the way through, but just cut down. Okay, I got off a little bit. So I have sort of 7.5 rows across, and then we're going to do 4 rows down. So I'm going to score in the center, and then I'll score half on that end and then halfway on this end, so I give me a little bit better equal bars. Okay, so now we should have 28 to 35 bars here depending on how big your rectangles are, but you can use any shape. So the other traditional part of this cookie are the holes that are poked in the top. So just get a fork with the tines, and again, we're going to start putting the holes in now. We may have to redefine them when they come out of the oven, and I'm just going to do 3 per bar. Ideally, they'll be fairly equal apart. That's what home baking does for you. Everything is not always perfect. These will likely close up as they bake, so we might want to go back and redefine them once it comes out of the oven when we make our official bar cuts. So long ago, butter was very expensive, and so the Scottish couldn't really afford to use butter in their cookies, so they weren't as sweet and rich as they are now. In fact, they were only served during the holidays because butter was so expensive. And since they're such a simple cookie, one of the ways that they can make it decorative is by adding the petticoat tails like Mary Queen of Scots, or putting the holes in them to make them look fairly pretty. These are also served at weddings in Scotland. In fact, January 6th is National Shortbread Day. However, you can enjoy Scottish shortbread any time of year. And they're all scored and ready to bake. So now we're going to place our shortbread in the oven. It's been preheated. And we're going to bake them for 45 minutes. And that should be it. They'll be golden brown, but 45 minutes should be just right. Shortbread is hot out of the oven, and while it is still warm, while it is still in its pan, we need to cut through and make the defined cookies. Since we've already scored them, we know exactly where those are going to be. All right, so find those scored marks and now cut all the way through to create those rectangle cookies. You can see they have closed up during baking, but you can still see them. We've scored them into 4 rows down, so go ahead and make those official cuts. So we have all of our equal bars in size. Now, if you wanted to make your fork marks more defined, just go back to where those marks were that you originally made and just poke those holes back in. The last thing that we're going to do is add a sprinkling of granulated sugar. And again, I'm using superfine because that's what I used in this cookie, but Whatever you want's fine. Allow the shortbread to cool in the pan for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes of cooling, all you need to do is lift up the cookies using the handles of the paper. And we're just gonna let them sit in the paper on the rack until they cool completely. In fact, you can go ahead and see the cookie as they come across. Those had a tight crumb. It's already starting to harden. It's gonna be a crunchy cookie, just like a shortbread. But we need to let them cool completely so the center sets up nicely so we can break them apart. Notice how easy they separate after they've cooled. You can see the holes on top where we used the fork tines. Notice the smooth edges after we cut them. Yep, there's a snap of a cookie. You can see the inside of that cookie. Nice toasty bottom. These are a nice Scottish shortbread cookie. See my recipe below in the description for optional flavor mix-ins like dried fruit, nuts, chocolate, and even Earl Grey tea. Shortbread ages well with time, so leave the cookies at room temperature for days and enjoy. Thanks for watching and for your support. Until next time, go bake the world.